The changes in the education sector, the way we assess students, the rise of digitalization and artificial intelligence, the changes in the learning environment, and many other unusual and controversial questions. We will be examining them one after the other in this channel. My name is Daniel Wiśniewski, and this is Education Chatter. Welcome to Education Charter. Today, we're going to talk about quite an interesting topic, which I think has become even more prominent because of the digital revolution, cyberbullying. And with us, we have an expert in that field, a UNESCO Chair who is working at DCU in Dublin, Professor James O'Higgins Norman. Professor, thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Professor, so first of all, I think everybody who has ever experienced any kind of education have seen or experienced types of bullying in general. Now, bullying and cyberbullying are not the same things. How would you kind of define or divide these two terms? In what sense they are similar and in what sense they are different from each other?
Okay, well, thanks, Daniel, for having me today. But we would be looking at bullying and cyberbullying now as much closer phenomena than we would have in the past. So if you'd asked me about this 10 or 15 years ago, we would have talked about cyberbullying probably as a very different, separate experience to bullying. And we would have presumed things like that the person who engages in cyberbullying will be anonymous, and that the victim or the target of the bullying online wouldn't be fully aware of who is actually bullying them at the time online. However, through our research over the last 10 or 15 years, we now realize that cyberbullying is usually strongly related to offline bullying experiences. So a kid in a school who gets bullied offline, that bullying spills online and then back again. So it's very, very, very rare that somebody will be bullied by somebody online that they don't know. And that it's very rare that bullying online occurs separate to offline bullying. Most of the time, it's the same person doing the bullying online and offline against the same person online and offline. And the research tells us that globally, about 30% of children in schools experience some form of bullying, which may include cyberbullying as part of that, or online bullying. And then here, say in Ireland, for example, our data would show that about 12% of post-primary children will describe themselves as being bullied either online or offline. So there's a great variation in terms of the rate of cyberbullying and bullying in different countries, but globally it's about a third of children would experience it.
So in other words, digitalization didn't really increase the let's say the presence of the bullying itself, but it rather became a tube to kind of make it this kind of a spillover effect from a real world into a virtual world. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. It's not like there's a whole load of new bullies out there who come online and only bully online. Of course, there are exceptional cases where there's somebody who is bullying someone else online and they're anonymous and they're hiding behind the screen, and that does exist, but that is very much in the minority. The vast majority of people who are bullied online are bullied by someone they know offline who is also bullying them offline. And I think that's really important to bear in mind, because it means we need to take a holistic approach to tackling that problem.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of forms of cyberbullying do you know? What is it? Is it just, I don't know, is it just like kind of insultive words written or posting photos? How does it really work in the cyber world?
Well, I think one of the things that's very important to say from the start is that the majority of children and young people and adults do not experience negative experiences like bullying online. The majority of people don't. However, a majority of people are aware of it happening online or see it happening online and often just look the other way or don't get involved. And part of the reason for that is that some of the forms of cyberbullying that take place are very subtle and are hard to actually identify as bullying, you know. So for example, a group of girls in a second level school maybe all in the same social group or in the same class group. And maybe four of them decide to have a party or have some social event, and they decide not to include a fifth one to make her feel excluded. And then what happens is they post the photos online and they tag the person who wasn't invited, so she knows that she's excluded from that. And they would do that over a period of time in a repeated way. And that might be one component of a whole spectrum of bullying experiences that that person's having with that group. So it can be hard sometimes for people who see that happening to know that actually there's bullying going on here, or is it just somebody being insensitive?
And any more extreme cases, like, I mean, this is a very subtle way indeed. It's like showing that you're not part of our group, but without really posting any photos. Do you have any cases of, I know, posting photos that people do not want to share, or maybe making jokes in front of, and in all kinds of social media and so on, out of other people and so on?
Those kind of cases are more extreme. They do occur, but they're not the norm. The majority of cases are more subtle, but the extreme cases are the ones that we hear about in the media. And the reason we hear about them a lot of the time in the media is because the effects of them and the impact of them on the victim can be quite extreme. So in an extreme case, you may have a target, somebody's being targeted by a group that they know or a person that they know, and they're telling them to hurt themselves or kill themselves. Nobody loves you. You're ugly. We hate you. Everybody hates you. Don't come to school tomorrow. All of that kind of nasty, really nasty stuff can occur, but it's at the more extreme end of the bullying continuum.
And do you think maybe, you know, coming to the teachers now, do you think that the current the teaching staff, the teachers, are actually able to identify those, or is it at all their responsibility? I mean, after all, I mean, I think it's a fair argument to make. Cyberspace is not a school itself, is it? And to what extent a school or a teacher can be actually responsible for preventing those types of bullying?
So you see, I think that would be a fair argument to make 10 years ago. But today, when we look at the blended lives that people live, children like adults live blended lives, and schools are blended environments, where in the past, you had a wall around the school, you had gates, and the kids came into the school, and you taught them, and you sent them home. That's not what schools are like anymore. Schools are connected to the internet. They're using the internet in the classroom. Children have laptops for learning. They're communicating with each other for education, for socializing, for entertainment, and for gaming, and so on. So, so it would be very unwise for a teacher or a school to conceive of themselves as not having any responsibility for their students when they're online. Because the fact of the matter is they may even have homework to do online when they go home, and schools require children to go online at different times. So it's a very complicated reality now. Our understanding of it was much simpler 15 or 20 years ago. When this is school, that's home, this is offline, that's online. But the blended lives that we all live, even ourselves, yourself and myself today, here we are doing this interview on Zoom, and it will be available online, and it will be out there. And that's just how we live today. And schools are part of that ecosystem. And as such, they do have a responsibility. If something is happening in a child's life that is in some way impacting negatively on their ability to participate and succeed in education, then schools have a responsibility. Now, they're not the only people with a responsibility. They can't fix everything. But as part of a team, as part of a connection with other stakeholders, they have a role to play. So in UNESCO, we talk about a whole education approach to tackling bullying and cyberbullying. And the whole education approach recognizes that schools have a very important role, but they don't have full responsibility on their own. They're part of a wider ecosystem. And that ecosystem includes community, family, government, support services, a whole load of different aspects of society. And really, we all have a role to play in trying to tackle and prevent and intervene when bullying and cyberbullying occur.
But let me maybe rephrase that argument, because I think it's an interesting case, and you're right, and maybe 10 years ago this was true. But from the perspective of a school management, if cyberbullying does happen in school, let's say someone is using a computer that is located in the school, or is even doesn't have to be in the school, but it could be taking place on the platform that is run by the school, then I could understand, yes, a school bears responsibility for that case. But then if this happens on Facebook or any other social media that is not even related to the school, or not even on any of the groups that could be somehow related to a particular class, can the school be liable to this kind of or can it be liable really to this kind of case where this kind of cyberbullying could happen?
So I think now you're asking a different question. Is a school liable? That implies that the school has some responsibility for what's happening. That's a different question. What I'm saying is that a school has a responsibility for the care of their students. And if something is happening in a student's life that's impacting negatively on them and their education, then of course the school will have an interest in trying to help solve that problem with other stakeholders. Now, the question of liability, that's whose fault is it? That's a whole different question, and we can certainly look at that, but and it's hotly debated. Is it the fault of the social media companies for creating the social media platform? Is it the fault of the parents for not supervising their children enough? Is it the fault of society for not providing enough education to children on how to be good digital citizens? That's all of those questions are really important and need to be looked at. But in terms of the care of the child does not exist at home or in school or in the community in isolation from each other. And all of these sectors have a responsibility to try and address a problem that's hurting the child.
I think indeed the challenge I think that cyberbullying does pose though is how can we really establish an ecosystem or environment where the child can grow? Because the thing is that what's happening in the school is no longer in isolation, and so there's a very big need for creating a kind of a very safe space between parents, teachers, and the entire community to make sure to prevent those. Because of course, I mean, one thing is that something happens during the school, at the school, in the school, at the time of education, receiving education or not. And most of cyberbullying, I assume, takes place out of school, really, and much of it could happen also out of the, let's say, working time of teachers. So I'm trying to defend the teachers here a bit, because it's also true that we kind of expect a lot from teachers themselves. Huh?
Yeah, but why would a teacher need to be defended in this situation? If a teacher is committed to education, then they're committed to doing whatever it takes to help their students succeed in education. So if a student's parent dies, does the teacher say that's nothing to do with us, that happened outside of school? No, the teacher will be concerned about that student coming back to school, will want to make sure they feel welcome and cared for. If a student becomes sick and unwell, the teacher won't say that's nothing to do with me, that's the doctor's job. We don't expect the teacher to heal the child, but we do expect the teacher to have involvement in helping the child on their journey towards healing and health again. So most teachers come from an understanding that care and concern for their students is part of their job. It's what makes it possible to be successful in education.
All right. Do you know any coming now to the schools themselves? Do you know any practices or anything that schools really put in place in order to prevent those? How can they really deal with this in any meaningful way?
So there are different approaches, and a number of internationally, a number of projects and initiatives have been developed to try and tackle bullying and cyberbullying. And going back to what I said earlier on, the most successful programs are those that treat bullying and cyberbullying as part of the same reality. But obviously, at times you need to focus in on the cyberbullying, and at times you'll need to focus in on the offline bullying. But yeah, there are a number of programs. For example, here at DCU, we have developed a program called Fuse, which is underpinned by research that's represents 25 years of work. And that program looks at promoting self-efficacy among students, parents, and school staff, so that they're able to recognize bullying and cyberbullying, respond to it appropriately, and then report it where necessary. And one of the things we know from research is that people kind of, when they're confronted with cyberbullying, either as a witness or as a target, that they often just say they didn't recognize it was happening until it was too late, or they didn't know what to do about it, or they didn't know who to report it to. So our FUSE program here is all about helping them to have those skills and have that knowledge. And so that's just one initiative. There are several initiatives all over Europe and all over the world, and all have been found to be successful to different degrees.
So it's really about, first of all, raising awareness among everybody involved, or anybody being kind of either a bystander or to kind of recognize that this is happening, because I think
Yes.
I mean, even in the real life, or in how to say it, really, in real life situations, bullying, when I was a child, it was not fully recognized yet. Maybe because in different countries the situation was different, and there were different forms, and maybe teachers were not aware or whatever. But I think that with digital world, it's even more. I mean, again, maybe in the case of Ireland it's different, but in many countries, teaching population are people with a certain age already. Maybe they are not that used to maneuvering around the digital technologies and social media. So I think, yes, raising awareness is one thing. But to what extent is this something is there any systematic approach to it or is it just school by school basis, on a basis of individual leadership?
No, you're absolutely right. We used to talk about, again, 10 years ago, we would have talked about a whole school approach to tackling cyberbullying, or a whole school approach to tackling bullying. We've moved on from that now, and we recognize that we need a whole society approach. And I mentioned earlier on that UNESCO has a framework which we call the whole education approach, which is basically recognizing the role of government, community, education systems, technology companies, and the local school, and everybody there. And so they all have a role in it. Now, the extent to which we have fully achieved success in this area is limited, because there are so many moving parts in it, and it's very difficult to kind of lock down a space and say, okay, we're going to tackle cyberbullying among this group of people now. And you might get a certain amount of success for a period of time, but then someone leaves, someone comes in. People are living in dynamic spaces, schools are dynamic spaces, society is dynamic. So it's very hard to say the job is done. What we need to do is be continuously raising that awareness. So the best programs are those that help people to reflect, first of all, on their own behavior. And then they can recognize if their own behavior is bullying, or if other people's behavior is bullying. And then you build up from there. But then parallel to that, at a systematic level, we need policy and we need legislation that supports the best practice around this. So we need a certain amount of regulation, so that social media companies and people who provide the platforms are providing the safest spaces possible for people to use. And then we also need legislation and support around what people are allowed to do. And at the same time, that all has to be balanced against people's freedom. We're not living in a dictatorship or a totalitarian regime. People have to have a certain amount of freedom online, and that comes with a certain amount of risk. And the question is, how much is acceptable risk for us to have for ourselves as adults? But then also we're extending the use of the internet and social media to children and adolescents. How much is acceptable acceptable risk there for them as well?
Do you know anything? Because I understand that, in order to tackle this, the involvement of parents is very important. I know that, I mean, at least in the school that my children go to, we do have, let's say, regular meetings about cyberspace, and the kind of let's say a kind of a supporting kit of how to make sure that our children are safe in this area. Any practices that you could share as well from your experience concerning involvement of parents in preventing cyberbullying?
Yeah, I think good communication is really important. So one thing a school can do is help parents communicate with each other. Often parents feel under pressure from their children because they want to do something or have something, and they say, oh, well, my friends have it, or their mommy or their daddy lets them do it. So one of the first things that I think is really successful is when a group of parents form a WhatsApp group, or they keep in regular contact with each other. What do we want for our children? And they share ideas, and they agree standards, and they agree approaches. And that can be really helpful. In one school, for example, I know here in Ireland, the parents have all agreed in a primary school that they won't give their children access to a smartphone until they're in post-primary.
Right.
So that just means there's no point asking for a phone. You're not going to get it. And you can't say, oh, my friend's parents allow them to have it, because we've already agreed as parents that's not going to happen. So I think being active as parents, communicating with each other, and making decisions about the standards you want for your children is really helpful. Of course, you can only ask people to buy into that. You can't make people buy into that. It's a very difficult space, because ultimately parenting is a very personal thing, and people make choices as parents that reflect their values and reflect their beliefs.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, in terms of the emergence of the the phenomenon, do you have any studies concerning where is it more evident or more widespread? Is
Mm-hmm.
this more present, I don't know, in areas where internet is, I mean, I cannot imagine that there's places now that there's no internet coverage,
Yeah.
but is it more as I don't know, a city kids phenomenon, or is it more rural areas? I don't know if this is at all relevant.
So it's it's a very good question, but we actually know from the research, it's not so much geographically dictated in terms of if someone doesn't have access to the internet for some reason, well, then they're not going to be cyberbullied. But if we take it that once people have access to the internet, what happens then? So what we find is that it's not so much a geographic thing, but it's more of an identity thing. So some people are more likely to experience cyberbullying than others. So basically, we know that people are the number one reason why people are identified as targets of bullying is to do with the way they look, or their gender, or their sexual identity. And these kind of issues are often the hooks on which bullying, cyberbullying, will occur.
Also,
So
disability, yeah? Disability is one of the aspects as
yeah,
well. You have any
yeah.
kind of disability, of course, this is also related to the way you look and act. This could also be one of those areas.
Or the way other people perceive you to perceive you. So if somebody is perceived to have a sexual orientation that doesn't match the majority, well, then some of the majority may decide to bully them, or because of that. Now, what can tackle that is, if again we go back to education, if people are educated about difference, that definitely reduces bullying and cyberbullying. But it really is important for us to keep in mind that it's about diversity issues tend to be the ones that are most frequently cited in cases of bullying and cyberbullying, and also in hate speech and other kind of negative online issues. Research around the amount of time that people spend online is interesting, because you would imagine that the more time you spend online, the more bullied people will be. But actually what we find is not so much about the amount of time, but what you're doing online and where you go online. That's what dictates bullying. So gaming, for example, if children are left unsupervised playing games online with people who aren't in the same room as them, maybe strangers, then the chance of them being bullied, or being groomed, or being having access to other negative experiences online, that increases. But if kids are online in a more controlled environment, doing things that are more educational, or if there's a better balance between their offline and online experiences, then bullying wouldn't be as high. So it's what you do online rather than how long you're online. It tends to be more of an indicator of whether you'll be cyberbullied or not.
I see. And is this kind of a different maybe question? I mean, what is more common? Is it, I mean, you mentioned here that most of children, most of cyberbullying or cyberbullying in most cases is kind of a derivative of the bullying itself in the real world. But then does also other types of cyberbullying take place? Let's say with people that well, I don't know, maybe you are being attacked or being insulted online. Does that also happen, or is it or is this a common phenomenon? Because that it does happen, but is it a common phenomenon as well?
So everything that happens in offline can happen online. But when it happens online, so it mostly is related to offline experiences. But of course, there are times when it's only happening online. And so sometimes a person may be targeted online because they stand out for some reason and someone doesn't like them and they decide to target them online. Maybe because of the color of their skin, maybe because of their gender, maybe because of their sexual orientation, their social class, their accent, whatever it might be. And so online that can happen. We did some research recently here in Ireland around hate speech online, and it was really interesting to see that ethnicity was really high up in terms of men being targeted online, and also religious beliefs as well, and age, religious beliefs, and ethnicity were high up on the reasons why men who experienced negative cyberbullying or online hate happened just online. And then with females, they were more likely to have their be targeted because of their sex, because they were females, in a sexist way, and maybe their negative things will be said against them online, and that kind of goes into the realm of hate speech as well as bullying. But it can happen online, but it's more likely if it's bullying to be online and offline.
I see. Okay, final question, really. What else can we really do to prevent this better? Is there anything that you believe is still missing? I mean, there are discussions, there are talks with parents, I think that there's quite a lot of actions raising awareness about it. There's an entire debate about safety and kind of an ICT literacy that allows you to kind of protect yourself as well in terms of what you should share, what you shouldn't share on social media, and so on. Is there something else we can do? Do you believe that there's something really missing and is easy to implement?
So I think there's a couple of things, and I think we can, if we think back to how the world was before the internet existed, and we think back to how parents prepare their children to go out into the world. They socialized them, they taught them manners, they taught them how to relate to other people, and they taught them how to cross the road safely. They taught them how to go to the shop and buy things, all in a gradual experience. And parents were in charge of that. Okay, I think we need to look at the online space in the same way, and we need to have a graduated approach to teaching children how to be online, what the social norms are, what are the basic things that are safe. But in order to do all that, parents need to feel confident. They need to feel that they are on top of this. So often in our research, parents will say, "Oh, my child is fine online. If there's a problem, they'll let me know." And when we would say to them, "Well, do you know how to use the apps that they use? Do you know how to use the social media that they use?" And the parents don't, because they're using different spaces online. So if I could just say one thing, it would be to parents to stay alongside in a supportive way with their children, go into the spaces they go into online, stay there with them until you're happy that they're able to stay there on their own, and keep checking in with them to find out what's going on. Schools, government, community, everybody else is there as a support to what parents can do, but it's all the parents are the leaders in this. They're not on their own. They're not the only people who can address it, but they are the leaders. And I think we need to all step up and just be a little bit more confident and well informed in terms of what our kids can do online, where they're going, and so on. And that's a difficult job, but you wouldn't put your child into a playground and go away and leave them alone and then see what happens. And to a large extent, we are doing that online a lot of the time. We're buying children phones, we're handing them to them, and we're leaving them there on their own. So we need to get much more involved, but not in a punitive way, not in a way that makes the children become secretive, not in a way that makes the children become fearful of their parents' involvement. It must be supportive, it must be empowering and encouraging of the child's participation online, but we need to be alongside them.
Strengthening the role of parents. I think that this is something that we can really finalize it here. I mean, I could not really agree more. I mean, I'm a parent myself, and I'm very concerned about any kind of involvement of my children or any kind of well, exposure, let's say, to digital tools. And so thank you very much for that. I think that this is I think the main motto of today. To our viewers, thank you very much for following us, and tell us what you think about it. Because of course, this is have you ever seen any forms of cyberbullying? Maybe share it with us. Thank you for subscribing this channel, and I wanted to thank Professor O'Higgins Norman for his time to share that he shared with us to tell us a bit more about the cyberbullying and its forms. So stay in touch. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.